All right, let's talk about clustered column store indexes. So the other night, I heard a Microsoft field engineer speak by the name of Vivek Sanil, and he was talking about these in-memory column store clustered indexes. And so being the kind of person that I am, I was like, hey, I want to play around with these and check them out and see if they're as good as they are supposed to be. Now, these are only available in SQL Server 2014 and beyond. And these are not the non-clustered versions. So the non-clustered versions are read-only. You can insert into it a lot of different restrictions. But the clustered column store indexes you can insert into. So I went ahead and took two of my bigger tables. And actually, I take that back. It was 4 total tables. But took some pretty big queries, some big tables. And I dropped all of their clustered indexes, and I created the clustered column store indexes. So one quick thing to note, when you create a clustered column store index, wow, it's like a tongue twister, you cannot create another index on the table at all. So you cannot create another clustered index, you can't create a non-clustered index, and you can't create a non-clustered column store index either. So it becomes the only index because it indexes the entire table, which is pretty interesting. But I have to say, there was, it was an incredibly impressive compression ratio. For instance, one of the tables, I think, was almost 5 gig, and it compressed it into about 500-ish meg. And I was like, wow, that's it's a little bit less than that. But, the compression ratio was about 7 to 8 to 1. It was really good. Query performance was better in most cases, and only slightly worse in other cases. I should have put an asterisk by this, but there's a big note for those of you who pay attention to these videos and watch the full thing. You're going to be benefited from this because, so the one that I put the clustered column store index on actually had less CPU power than the one that had the normal indexing. But yet the queries were still, in some cases, faster for the custom column store index than the other server, even though the other server had more CPU power behind it and a little bit more memory. So, comparing like to like probably would have had an impact as far as if it was really the same CPU power. But I thought it was interesting because none of the queries done by the clustered column store indexes performed much worse at all. So they were performing still pretty good. And remember, that's with that compression ratio of, you're looking 7 to 8 to 1. Usually when you compress things, you're going to expect some CPU overhead. There was, according to the engineer, there's less of a memory impact and disk impact because of how these are stored and how they're read. And then the problem, one of the downsides, and you can read further into this, but there's some restrictions to these. I was disappointed with some of the some of the stuff on the replication side. Some data types aren't supported either. So pay attention. Make sure to test and verify that you can use these. And the other thing that I note here is you want to pay attention to the delta store. The delta store is where new rows go, and those are not initially compressed. But once it hits a certain threshold, then it goes and it is compressed. So what you can do is you can select star from the sys column store row groups, and you will see the compressed rows, and then you will see what you're going to look at is the column delta store, HOBTID. And if that value is not null, there will be like a numeric value. If that value is not null, that is the part that's the rows that are still open. And so this video, of course, I'm running out of time, but this video is not going to get into how it updates, but kind of think of it as almost like a queue holding table until it reaches a threshold, and then of course it moves it down to the compressed portion. And so, for instance, rows that are deleted basically are really added records with almost like a delete flag. And when it goes out and retrieves those rows, it knows to exclude those because those have been deleted. And it does still require index maintenance. You will have to rebuild it from time to time. And of course, that's where you can get that information from that sys column store row groups there as well. But either way, if you have SQL Server 2014 and you haven't played around with it, for a data warehouse possible solution, possible performance increase, or maybe even just compacting scrunching up your data without hurting things too much, I would definitely check it out.